Ciao Marco, I'm very good. How are you?
All good, yes. Thanks a lot for being here. It's really a pleasure to talk with you. Yes.
Yeah, likewise. I think that it's wonderful that technology enables.
Oh, maybe you need to mute the YouTube.
Sorry, that was me. I had the YouTube
Yes.
link on the other browser. So yeah, so I'll just finish the sentence. I am. It's amazing with technology that we can have discussions like this all the way around the world, and it's a very yeah. No. I'm always excited to talk about Rust, and I'm always excited about more people learning Rust because I think that the language has a huge future to improve software for generations.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, me and Tim are like 12-hour difference. For me, it's like 9 p.m., while for you it's 9 a.m. So we can say we are at the opposite sides of the world in one way.
Yeah, New Zealand is on the wrong time zone, basically. At least it's both physically isolated as well as temporally isolated from most of the planet. But uh, it's also nice to be quite far away at times. But uh, yeah, no. Thank you very much for meeting me. It's such like in the evening. Um,
No, yes, that's the usual time I speak to people, so don't worry.
okay.
Um, yeah, so we have a few people connected. Ayorun, who says this is going to be great. I agree. It's going to be awesome. And then we have also Oliver, who says morning team. Exactly, morning. And we have also Paolo, who maybe you met at Rust Lab. So yeah, nice. And yeah, so we're going to start the episode in 1 minute. I just wanted to say that to everyone listening that if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And actually, Tim has a surprise for all of you. Uh, Announce it, Tim. Yeah. For,
The best question gets to win a prize. I have one of these copies of this book that you might have recognized with this boxer, a French boxer from the 19th century, actually, and it's the book that I wrote. And you're welcome to have a copy. I'll write you a note and send it to you. So please do ask questions in the chat.
okay. So yeah, the best questions will win a signed copy from of Rust in Action from Tim. So that's really nice. Hi, Matteo. Um, yeah. So I guess we can start. Yes. So let's go. Welcome to RustShip, the podcast for developers who ship Rust code. I'm your host, Marco Iani. I'm a Rust developer and I enjoy talking to other people, especially to other developers, and especially I like talking about Rust. So here we are. This is RustShip episode number 10. So nice round number. And today we have Tim McNamara with us. Hi, Tim, and thank you for accepting my invitation.
No, congratulations on reaching number 10. It's a fun podcast, and I love hearing from people.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. So Tim is the founder at Accelerant. He's also a organizer of the Rust conference Rust Forge, which we'll cover. Uh, Tim is also hosting the Compose podcast. So uh, check it out on your podcast platform. Look for Compose and subscribe because it is great. It is great. And Tim is also the author of the Rust in Action book. Did I forget something?
Maybe the only thing would be the YouTube channel, but like the it's very difficult when there are sort of more than 5 things. I think the big um yeah, I'll send Marco some links to add on to the show notes for the show. But
Yes.
if you're also on social media, I am sort of online in many places. And if you search for Tim Clicks, you should find me.
Exactly. Yeah, if you go to teamclicks.dev, you find the links to everywhere, like the Discord channel of Team, the YouTube, and so on and so on. But yeah, we will cover more things during the episode. And so, Tim just tuned and says, I usually listen to this after the fact on my phone. I didn't realize I was missing out on the guest waving. So, yeah, hi, Tim. And yeah, if you're listening this after the fact, make sure to follow me as well on like YouTube, LinkedIn, or X, where I stream this podcast live, so you can ask the questions to the guests. Great. Uh, so I would say let's start. Let's jump into it because we have a lot to cover. So today we will cover what's the best way to learn Rust, tips for the beginners, and also what's the best way to teach Rust. So I would like to ask you, yeah, if you have any tips to people who are already familiar with Rust, but maybe they want to help others to get started. And also, I wanted to ask you, how is it going at Accelerant, the company that you founded almost 2 years ago? So I'm sure you will have a lot to say there. Also, a product that you are starting to collect feedback for. And also, I want to ask you about RustForge, which is the Rust conference that you're organizing in New Zealand that will happen in August. Yes. So,
Wonderful.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
cool. So your first question was, do I have any tips for people learning Rust?
Yes, exactly.
I do. I think that people. So the first tip is that programming is very hard, and learning to program a new language is difficult. And one of the things to remember is that it takes time for your brain to be able to use a new language fluently. Just like a just like if we read if I go to Italy, I'll try and read road signs and I will get confused because the pronunciation on different letters is different. And my brain does not know how to process Italian in the same way that it is able to read signs automatically from English. It needs to go and look at the signs letter by letter when it's speaking in a foreign language. And whereas if I look at signage in English, it can automatically chunk that whole sign into sort of one item. And the work that I like to reference a lot is by Felina Hermans. She is a Dutch academic who studies how to learn programming languages and how to teach programming languages. And she's written a book called The Programmer's Brain. And it talks about the fact that we only have, let's say, 7, approximately, probably 5 slots in our memory, in our so-called working memory. And when we are learning a new skill, we don't have, we have to use up some of those slots for things that we don't need to use later on. So if I'm reading road signs in a foreign language, or I have to use some of those slots, and then for, let's say, individual letters, or maybe the symbol is different, and so so this looks like important knowledge to me. Whereas if I'm accustomed to the area, I know that the whole sign is just one item, and it takes up fewer slots in my working memory. When you are developing or learning a new language, every single token, like all of the keywords, all of the syntax, takes up your working memory. And so there's very little capacity for you to learn new things. And so it's much slower than you expect. And So that would be my biggest tip, is to give yourself permission to go slow. And more practically though, I love using exercises as the vehicle for teaching yourself how to, like, a new skill. Small things and getting something working. And I quite like visual examples. So things, if I can make something move on the screen or create some sort of output, then the relationship between what I'm coding and what I'm producing is very clear. And creating examples of increasing complexity, I think, is very useful.
Okay, so you will suggest to, like, for the first exercises, maybe to create something visual that.
For the very first exercise, what we want to do is, me personally, I like seeing that interaction, but it might be different for you. You might find that you don't care about visual output. All you care is that the program works, for example. And what I suggest that you do is to create something that you would be able to create very easily, let's say within 5 minutes, in a language, let's say Python or JavaScript or something else that you are already familiar with, or Java or C# or whatever language. By the way, this reminds me that, you know, the large majority of people that I'm talking to here already have another programming language. Rust is their next programming language. And so you already understand what a variable is. You already understand what a data type is. That's a bit different than if you're using Rust as your first language. But if Rust is your next language, then you could probably already implement easy thing. You already have programs that you could complete quite simply in your the language that you prefer. You come along to Rust, and then you can modify your and then you can recreate something that works in this new language. There is a small risk that you will encounter problems with. You might encounter problems with the fact that your new language, Rust, operates differently than your old language. You'll find that your mental model of how you think that everything should work together sort of breaks down at some point. I think the most obvious one for me, for beginners, is the copy trait. Most beginners start, like, when we start with a new language, it's really easy to start with numbers. Numbers are the most simplistic data that a computer really understands, and addition, subtraction, these sorts of things are easy. At least they feel easy, until we discover that Rust has fixed size integers. But let's say that it's easy, and your code will work. But then when you start to use strings or vectors, the exact same code might start to break. You'll receive errors like use of moved value, even though structurally all of your variables are in exactly the same places. They're just used with a different data type. And that's because of the way that the copy trait works, and it changes the semantics of what a variable does. We, technically speaking, shift from copy semantics, which is what primitives such as booleans and integers, floating point numbers, they just, whenever there is sorry, I tried to speak 3 sentences at once just then. So primitive types rely on this thing called the copy trait. And so whenever there is a conflict with what Rust calls ownership, the value will just be duplicated. Strings, vectors, and other more complicated types, things that require things that have more complexity do not implement the copy trait. They rely on what is known as move semantics, and so the terminology means that the responsibility. So when we say move in that context, Rust is not moving bytes around in memory. Instead, it's moving responsibility for deletion. Rust is very particular about where data is deleted and will only allow one place in your program to be responsible for deletion of every variable. And so when I say that there might be ambiguity or conflict, it's possible to create multiple variables that point to the same data type. With numbers, that's never a problem because Rust just creates as many numbers as it needs. But with a string, it's less willing to copy things around, and so it will force you to decide, what do you mean? Like, where do you actually want this thing to be deleted? And if you really do want multiple copies, then you should create them. If you don't, and instead you want to refer back to the original data, then I require that you create a reference back to the original string. And so the Rust terminology for taking a reference is some more jargon called borrowing. So what ends up happening with Rust when you learn it is that you start, like, I recommend that you start with more with examples. Like, essentially you get larger, more complicated programs. Then you'll find that there are some issue with it's hard. I say issue with, and I meant to say your memory, sorry, your mental model. But I don't mean that there's a problem with the model. It's just that your model no longer fits the new situation, and we need to learn a bit more of Rust. Arguably, Rust should also be friendlier. Like, it should have fewer instances of confusing things. But currently, as it stands today, the language does push a lot of burden to beginning programmers. By the way, I don't mean to be rambling like this. If this is,
Yeah.
feel
No,
free
no, no.
to.
I was listening. Yes. Yeah. So I agree that the copy trait might be one of the main issues when you're starting. But I think in the long run it pays off because, like in other languages, yeah, I'm sure you mean it. Yes, but yeah, like in other languages, for example, I always struggle to understand. Okay, I'm passing a list to this function in Python. What does it do? It copies it, and so like I edit it, and then it after I exit the function, the list is the same as before. So there might be a lot of issues. Instead, in Rust, Rust stops you if you're copying like if you're trying to copy something that is expensive to copy. Basically, it stops you and say, no, you cannot copy this implicitly. You need to copy it explicitly. And so you can do, for example, a clone on it. Yes. So this is definitely something that, like when you're doing hello world programs and so on, it's. But then, in the long run, you appreciate it. And I think it's a lot like this for many Rust concepts. For example, I think one of the hardest Rust concepts to understand is the borrow checker. Like, there is a lot of confusion around it. I would like to give us I'm curious to understand, how do you explain the borrow checker to your students?
May I, just before I do, I just wanted to reinforce your point
Yes.
about the fact that when you learn Rust, it's actually very hard to go back to other languages with things like, because they are not as precise. Like, Rust is very precise, and it's very clear what the intent is. Even things like result, option, you go back to Python or TypeScript or something, even TypeScript, let's say, it's very sloppy. Like, it feels very easy to make mistakes that so I finally understand why people that learned Haskell a decade or more ago have been screaming at the rest of the programming language community saying, why don't you use a real type system? Anyway, to go back to your question about the borrow checker, well, I start by not using the term borrow checker. I think that the jargon is itself a barrier. Things like the we talked about working memory right at the start. People get very flustered. They very stressed because they are trying to remember the correct term. Is it reference? Is it borrow? Is it pointer? Is it memory address? Is it a shared point? Like, is it a shared pointer or a shared reference or a unique reference? Is it a unique pointer? Is it a shared borrow? Like, that already takes up a lot of mental energy. And then the semantics and then the syntax of trying to get what you want is also unclear. And so instead of talking about a borrow checker existing that is essentially a linter, I try to provide a very strong model for the way that Rust thinks about data and access to data. So the most famous talk that the most well listened to talk was actually during COVID. It was 2021, and I gave a virtual talk at Rust Lints, how to learn Rust, and the big messages were, one, that the Rust language cares about two things. One is its trait system, that data types are that we use traits to change the behavior of types. And the other thing that Rust is really big about is safe access to data. And trying to make it very clear to people that there can be only one place in your program where something can be deleted, and makes it feel a little bit simpler. You're trying to just provide the principles that Rust is applying, rather than teaching the borrow checker as some mysterious auditor that is going to arbitrarily refuse to compile your program. I think that teaching the borrow checker like it is some sort of opponent, or as though it is in your way, does cause an issue, because you don't want to create a hostile environment with your programming environment. Like, people say that they hate Rust, well, and they're fighting the borrow checker, and what that means is that their mental model, the way that they think about structuring their programs, does not fit Rust's approach very well. And that probably implies that they don't appreciate the way that Rust is the way that Rust works. And so, but to describe the borrow checker, I also changed the terminology slightly. So instead of using the term a shared reference, or a shared borrow, or an immutable borrow, I like to use read-only borrow. So I try to use as little jargon as possible, or I try to use terms that people already understand. The other term that I like to use, instead of saying a unique borrow, or also known as a mutable borrow, is to call it a read-write borrow. I actually personally don't like the borrowing metaphor, but at this point it would be too difficult to essentially change. And and I think using the terms read write and read only, that makes some intuitive sense. and then describing the fact that you can only have one part of your program that is allowed write access, but multiple parts of your program can have read access. That's something that people understand.
Yeah.
So if we now know that there's one part of your program that has responsibility for deletion, well, that's Rust's ownership model. And if we now know that only one part of your program has write access, well, that kind of feels a lot like the borrow checker. And then, and now we've explained the borrow checker without using the term borrow checker.
Nice.
Because
So, yes, go ahead. Sorry.
So my approach generally is to try to remember that we don't know how much working memory programmers have. If they are new to programming, they might struggle with. So one of the other things is, so just as an example, even someone who is not new to programming, but I worked with a team of C developers who decided to rewrite a core component in Rust. And because they wanted to use a quote modern language, and they were worried that they would be left behind, essentially, and they wanted the benefits of Rust because they were sick of dealing with null pointer references or null pointer dereferencing and so forth. So there's memory safety issues that Rust prevents by design. And one of them in particular had a lot of difficulty with the fact that Rust uses every single type of brace. It uses parentheses, which in New Zealand English we'd call those brackets, but that's okay. We call them parentheses here. Angle braces, curly braces, and it was very, very complicated for this person to figure out exactly when to use which type of brace. For example, with tuples, sometimes, from the outside, until you understand what's happening, you see a tuple, and sometimes it has angle braces when it's defined as a type, and sometimes it does not. And that is something that I no longer perceive as a problem, because I am very familiar with the Rust syntax. But and this is a problem called expert blindness. So when experts try to teach a language, they actually forget how much there is to learn. They are blind to the problems. And the other thing that happens to people when they teach is they use phrases like easy or trivial. Simple. Just very small. And the reason why those are extremely dangerous as a teacher is you could imagine being, it doesn't need to be, let's just a tip, like I was going to say historical, but like a traditional classroom setting, let's say that you get in a trainer who starts describing things as simple to you, and you're sitting near the back of the room, and you are completely lost.
Yes. I've been there in university, yes.
Yeah. And what do? You either think one of two things. One, you are stupid, or two, that the instructor is stupid. Both of those are kind of negative. But normally you think, I'm stupid, I should stay quiet.
Right, because saying that something is simple, maybe it demotivates you from asking questions too.
Exactly. And so this is, so I've jumped around off topic a little bit, but the teaching the borrow checker is a sort of, it has multiple levels. I tried to teach the fundamentals of what the borrow checker is attempting to do, and try to explain that we can only have one part of your program that has write access, for example. The other thing that you need to that I like to do is teach the audience that this is the way that Rust provides the guarantees that it does. Its memory safety guarantees are enforced by this part of the language, or actually, strictly speaking, part of the compiler that that eliminate entire classes of problems. And so there is a motivation there. We receive the fundamentals, and then once the fundamentals are understood, we then try to explain the error messages and sort of essentially describe why the jargon looks the way that it does.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to recap because I think like I learned a few things. The first is that the best way to explain the root checker is not explaining it, because I think it just confuses people. The second one is that instead of talking about sharing and borrowing, you can talk about read only and read write, which I think is great. Yes, and the second one, and the third one that I understood is to avoid things like simple and easy when teaching. Do you have other tips for people who are teaching Rust to, for example, colleagues who, for example, are onboarding at their companies, or simply friends? I don't know.
Yeah. So sorry for the dead air. I do have a couple of tips, but they are they come from a slightly different place. So normally when Rust is adopted by a company or by a team, what will happen is that some person has learned Rust by themselves for 3 or 4 years, maybe more, maybe less. And they start talking to people and saying, we should use Rust. We should use Rust. We should use Rust. And they become seen as the Rust person in the team or the Rust person at the company. And finally, someone in management or says, okay, for this thing, we will use Rust. And now you have a different problem, because you're not just coding in Rust. Finally, you get to code in Rust at work. That's perfect. But now you also have a teaching or a leadership role that you inherit, or at least this comes with the fact that you have driven change inside the company, and you also need to accept. So the first answer to your question is to remind people who are advocating for Rust that they will be seen as the experts in the language. And even if they don't feel like an expert, everyone else in the company feels even less confident than they do. And so to be perceived as the expert or the knowledgeable person is essentially a hat that they will need to they'll need to wear, because everyone else will see them in that way. And so there is a leadership function that you need to prepare yourself for. To teach Rust, you should it's very difficult to give general advice, but I think that using sympathy, and accepting where people are is very important. One of the things that is useful to do is try to remove organizational rank. So if you are in a company that is very hierarchical, or if you know that 1 or 2 people are very influential or powerful because they have been there for, 8+ years and they know everything, and they are seen as much more senior, then it can be very intimidating for more junior people to learn. They immediately tense up. And in fact, the opposite is also true. So if you are in a space where someone is very senior, but they no longer have the magical powers anymore because they don't know Rust. That is a space which is threatening to them. They won't recognize that as a threat, but part of them will, but they are familiar with being seen as the leaders in the company, and now you're taking some of that power away because you are more skilled than the people who would be historically seen as the power in the company. So one of the things that you can control as someone teaching the language is the setting in which you're doing the teaching, or everyone is doing the learning. And I don't think that it's useful to say, oh, you should create a Slack channel and you should have weekly or fortnightly, sorry, bi-weekly meetings, and because you inside the company can decide which tools to use. Those are easy choices. The more significant things to think about are, how does our company operate? Which other, when someone decided to adopt Python or adopt instead of Java, possibly, like, have there been other languages that have tried and failed to gain adoption in the company? And then I think, generally speaking, what you want to do is be seen as helpful rather than being seen as bossy or annoying. I think I'm slightly controversial, possibly, in believing that it's okay when you are learning a new language to use a style which looks like I don't know, which looks like your previous language. For example, people, if they are Java programmers and they have been if they have been Java programmers their entire career, it is natural that they will try to write Java with Rust syntax.
Yeah, maybe a lot of Dean usage. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's either using the deref trait to create object orientation in a Rust if they learn about the deref trait. Other things would be to create heavily use of trait objects and using lots and lots and lots of traits and nested traits. So, for example, we create super traits and so forth, and that's actually okay. It's impossible to say that, okay, today I'm a Rust programmer. What will happen is that gradually you will be exposed to more Rust code, and over time you will find things that are more idiomatic, and then you will go back and update your previous code. Likewise, if you're from Python and you like explicit return statements, you might insert explicit return statements. And there are other things which I find that are necessary because I am now exposed to, I have been a Python developer, a Rust developer for a long time. And previous to that, and also I've been teaching Rust for a while. I started my company to teach Rust. And so that that gives me a particular emphasis on not trying to be too prescriptive at once. So the reason why I try not to apply too many extra rules. For example, you might decide that it is bad practice to return a Boolean. So because instead you should create a custom enum that describes exactly what it is that your your domain or your application is actually trying to return. And so from the perspective of type safety and so forth, using more types is useful. But there might be other people who just return booleans all the time. Like,
Yeah.
I think I've heard the expression blind booleans, but but anyway, the you can't enforce all of the rules while people are learning the language, because they only have so many items in their working memory, and once that limit is reached, they have no capacity to learn or absorb new knowledge. They get frustrated, and then they just, flip the table,
Yeah.
storm out of the room, slam the door, and they go onto social media and just, scream about how much they hate Rust.
So do you suggest to focus on like a few concepts per time, like make some things that are not 100% automatic pass the first week, and then teach them the next week maybe, because yes, if you yeah.
Yeah, well, even the time frame itself will be determined by people's progress.
Yeah.
But yes, I think that it's okay to do things step by step. It's okay to do things in progression. When people learn to read, they do things character by character. And then we learn about small words, and then we learn about large words, then we learn about sentences, and punctuation, what the capitalization rules are, for example. And I think that it's okay to do things. We don't need to learn all of the rules right at the start. And that way, we need to respect the fact that we, as biological machines, I don't want to be too reductivist, or like, we need to accept our own limitations and the way that we learn. Our brains like to build them. They like to apply their old knowledge to the new situation by analogy, and and one of the things that needs to adjust slowly is that Rust is different. It has a new thing that it attaches to variables. So one of the terms we haven't mentioned yet is lifetime. Mm-hmm. A Rust variable is not just a name and a data type, which most programming languages are. It includes a third thing as well. Normally it's hidden, but it's a lifetime parameter, which operates in a similar way to a data type, but it relates to, I suppose, the logical time in which it is valid to access a variable. And we don't need to teach everything at the start.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, I think balancing the cognitive load of people, of the students, is a great tip. Yes. So I was a bad host because I didn't read the comments that we received. So the first one was from Paolo, who said, I can confirm after learning Rust, I continuously wonder how other languages deal with pointers, especially when it comes to what I'm adding. Yeah, exactly. And then he says again, oh, sorry. He says, I feel in part for me, the difficulty was the fact that I didn't know any other non-GC language. So I never thought about the fact that I can. Wait, I'm having some issues with the. Do you see the?
I can see the overlay, yeah. Although,
can you read it?
I can confirm after learning Rust, I continuously wonder wonder how other languages deal with pointers, especially when it comes to the data that I'm editing or to what editor that I'm dating. I think this comment refers to the fact that when you go back to any other language, they don't have the borrow checker, they don't have lifetimes. You need to make sure it's the context of the variable is all that you have. And if someone has put the variable in the wrong place or returned a reference to a local variable, for example, then you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
So a and for those people that who are listening who aren't aware, if you have a variable, a local variable, and you return that a reference, which is returning a memory address from the function, this causes lots of issues. It's technically perfectly legitimate. A compiler could happily produce this code, but what is the way that they are implemented is that when a function returns, that the memory where the local variables are reused for the next function call. So it's if you held on to a reference to a local variable, then you might have the case where you're actually accidentally pointing either to invalid memory or to some other function's data.
Yeah. Yeah, I see. Then we have another comment from Tim who says, so when teaching, do you recommend covering copy types first and moving on to move semantics later? I generally cover more move semantics first, and I leave copy types until traits are discussed.
So I struggle with this because the place that people want to start when they learn a language is with integers, floating point numbers, booleans, which are all copy types.
Yeah.
And so I would really be very interested in where in how Tim approaches that, because it's much nicer to explain the general principle and then talk about the exception, which is the copy type. The copy trait, which is applied to primitive types, rather than the other way around. I'm saying starting with the copy types and then saying, sorry, we've been lying to you this whole time. Rust, actually, the code that you have been writing is essentially illegal Rust, but we have this exception for primitive types because they're so cheap to copy.
I see. And there is this comment from Mods, who says, one of the features of Rust after I did learn it and started my career with it is that is cleaning engineers' mindset, especially in memory management perspective. So this comment, I think it's a good bridge to ask you the next question, which is: do you think it's better to learn Rust as a first language so that your mind is empty? Let's say you don't have other preconception of other things you studied from other languages. Do you think Rust is a good first language to learn?
I think that this is something that I would like to verify. I think that Rust, but is Rust a good first language? I still am trying to decide on the answer that I'm most happy with. But here we go. I think that Rust is a very good first language because you can produce almost any software that you want. To use a metaphor, there's almost no ceiling. But I still think that something like, but there's quite a lot of parts that you need to learn to start. Rust, for example, Rust most Rust programs use lots of dependencies. And so now, in particular, things like regular expressions or interacting with the network, it's very difficult within the standard library to use that. To use and so now, sorry, it's very difficult to just use the standard library to get started, and we don't have JSON support in there. And now that means that you need dependencies to do anything big or even anything medium-sized, which means that to start, you need to learn about TOML syntax and semantic versioning and the build system. And it's very bureaucratic. But JavaScript, you just need to type into an HTML. Like, yes, you need to learn HTML, but you could type into an HTML page and then just load it up into a browser, and then you have something happening, and it's immediate, and you don't need to install anything because you already have a web browser. And so I think it is a very good first language from a theoretical point of view, where it's a strong type system. It is extremely fast. It allows you to build almost anything that you want, and so you can be it's very powerful, and once you learn it, you'll be able to do whatever you want. But for people that are just starting, there are lots of, I don't know what the right metaphor is, but lots of traps to get stuck. For example, there's no Rust command. I install Rust by going to a thing called RustUp, and then I use RustUp to install Cargo, and then I interact, and then Cargo, but Cargo is not Rust. And it's these sorts of things which just add extra mental load that are distracting and annoying. There are lots of things that are distracting and annoying, and so that's one advantage of learning with somebody. But yeah, I think the short answer is it's an extremely good programming language, but I think it's like another bad metaphor might be like a powerful train or something. It takes a while to get started because it's very heavy.
I see. I wonder if like the Rust playground might help there, because it's like you load the website and you click run and everything works. I saw you use it also when you do demonstrations and so on. So probably you think it's a powerful learning resource.
There are two things that I think will make a big difference. One is that, yes, the playground exists already. It's there, it works, it's useful. The other thing that I think will make life much easier for beginners is Cargo Script.
I know you were going to mention it, yes.
So Cargo Script is it provides the ability for you to declare your dependencies in the Rust file itself with a special comment syntax. So essentially, your cargo.toml is inside the top of your Rust file as metadata. It is actually enabled as a nightly feature inside Cargo, and so I think it's dash capital Z or capital Z script. I don't remember the exact, but it's coming. It's going to be amazing, and the other one is the playground, so that you don't need as much to install. The only thing is that it would be nice if it was easier to self-host the playground. So I think that in a commercial environment, the public playground exposes a few risks, primarily around the share button. and the fact that it creates a public GitHub gist, which could potentially leak confidential code. And in fact, that goes to what I think one of your follow-up questions are, is like, well, what are some of the things that you are thinking about? And one of the things that I'm thinking about is making it very easy for people to create a private playground and and also to provide a policy engine above dependencies. At the moment, as soon as someone publishes a new version to crates.io, the public has access to their public has access to that version. This means a couple of things. One, it's very easy for a dependency to go live, which doesn't use, let's say, release police or cargo release, and just breaks something.
Yeah.
And then it might take an hour, it might take a week to figure out why your CI system has broken because the dependencies have updated. And that's another thing that I'm hopeful that my company Accelerant will be able to provide a sort of a commercial offering around.
Nice. Yes, I want to ask you more about that. Yes, sure. So we had some follow-ups. So the first one is from Tim, that he says he shows example with strengths first and mention numbers later, which I think is the opposite approach that you take, right? That's nice that there are more different approaches. Yes. Also, Mod says also the static data type and syntax like match and others teach engineers to be accurate with dealing with data and make sure data flow in the system is on the right way. Yes, for example, yeah, the exhaustive match I really like a lot from Rust. Yes. And yeah, Tim says, like you say, it's tempting to start with numbers because they seem more normal. But I think it makes it harder somehow, since smooth semantics feel like an exception. Yeah, in theory, in general, yeah, numbers are the exceptions because the structs that you create don't inherit copy.
Yeah, there are a few places where Rust is confusing. One of them is the difference between the copy trait and move. Another one would be the difference between the debug trait and the display trait. And there are a few other things. For example, to create a string, there's the toString trait, and then there's also the toOwned trait. And then we also have a difference between the asRef trait and then the deref trait as well. There are lots of, not lots, but there are enough things in Rust which are very similar, but they're distinct. And the difficulty is compounding. So if you are unfamiliar with the difference between debug and display, you worry that you are using the wrong trait. And then you might also wonder, should I be using the asRef trait or should I be using something else? And now for example, I could use a trait object or something. It doesn't matter. Or should I use into or from? And these decisions make it hard for people that are learning to just get going. It's as though, when you get ready in the morning, you need to remember your keys, you need to have breakfast, you need to, check the mailbox or something. And now you might have like 6 things that you all need to remember every day. And individually, each of those tasks are easy. But yeah, for some reason, I mean, maybe I'm talking too much about myself, but for some reason, it's very hard to get all of them right all of the time. and I might have put the keys down in the wrong place or something. And I think a similar thing happens when you are learning Rust, that you encounter some decision points that make it very difficult to feel like you're moving forward in a linear, fast way.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, there was also a question from Matteo about the job market, whether you recommend learning Rust if somebody's trying to get into the job market. But I want to keep this question for later if we have time, because we have a lot to cover. And yeah, the next thing I would like to cover is your company, Accelerant. So I wanted to ask you why the name Accelerant, and then what is this company? What services do you offer? And yeah, the new product that you're trying to get feedback. If you
Yeah.
can tell
Okay.
more about it.
Okay. So first of all, what is the name Accelerant? Well, it needed to be called something.
Yes.
And I thought it would be good. So the idea is that I can reduce the reduce the time it takes for your team to be productive with Rust. The reason why people pay us, and there is a small team now, it's most contractors, so I guess it's primarily me on the front, but I'm also working. One of the other people that I have listed on the website is the author of Cargo Semvercheks, Predrag Guvsky, and and our job is to take your learning journey from, I don't know, 3 months down to 6 weeks or less. And so can we make your team very productive? Can we accelerate your progress? And so that, for me, is the reason why we're called Accelerant. And the other thing was that, and more broadly, Rust is a better default for software being written today. And I think that its role is increasing, and that is a position that is deserved. And I want to accelerate that because there's a huge amount of waste in software. Software is inefficient. It's very energy intensive. It's also very brittle. It breaks a lot. I don't trust software updates. I'm worried that they're going to break my computer. I I don't trust that. We expect that things crash, like when even systems that should never really crash, and so all of these things make me think that like an acceleration metaphor is important. Lastly, for businesses themselves, they can serve their customers much faster with fewer resources. And so while I was working at AWS, for example, I did a very similar function of essentially advocating for the language. And the default inside Amazon, probably still today, is to implement services in Java. And that would mean using Java to write Lambda functions, which have very slow cold start latencies in particular. But with Rust, we could finish the whole execution before, within, let's say, 100 milliseconds versus, let's say, 8,000. So we can reduce an order of magnitude of delay. This has a very significant impact for customers because suddenly everything feels snappier and fresher. And that is something that you have the power to do in your business while reducing the amount of frustration because you're continuously fighting fires. So now, you might wonder, well, why on earth did you start a company? And if there's anyone interested in that story, I don't know if this is useful to talk about, but just in case, I mean, I'm happy to stop. But I was essentially made redundant. My team at Amazon, we were, I was brought in or worked with John Genset, the author of Rust for Rustations, and and a few others. And we were that was and at some point it was very clear that the return to office mandate meant that our team, which was globally distributed, was essentially not going to work anymore. I woke up and my laptop, my company issued laptop kind of had a warning saying that my device was in a network limited mode, which meant that essentially my role at the company was no longer present.
Unfortunately,
So essentially I had to create a job from scratch. It hasn't been 2 years. I started around about the 1st of June last year. So it's coming up to 18 months. Oh no, I guess it's maybe just a little bit over 18 months. So, but it's been highly successful. I have been working with some of the world's largest software companies, some of it's the smallest. It's been a real privilege to be able to be paid to work on supporting people with the language. And as part of that, I've also been thinking about ways to move away from a pure training and consulting business. I would like to become more of a product company where with a recurring revenue, which means that we can start to employ people to work on Rust and essentially grow the company organically rather than relying on consulting, which takes a lot of time to negotiate contracts. Some of the, I've been in business for 18 months, but some of the contracts that I've worked on have taken 9 months to negotiate. So it's not very nice as essentially sole, like a little company. So two of the ideas that I have been thinking about, in fact, Pedrag and I have been thinking about, primarily the idea between, can we make it so that you choose, or can we give you a warning if updating your dependencies will break your software? So let's say that you have a product that uses Rust. You might be some GUI utility, for example, or it might be anything else. Your CI is continuously building it and updating the dependencies, and then all of a sudden it runs cargo update and then things break because someone might have accidentally slipped in a breaking change or some other thing has changed. Now, you have your schedule. We could make sure that, because we can run analysis over all of your dependencies and all of their versions and make sure that the update, we know exactly which API service that you touch. And so, because we have access to, we could say that the next version will succeed. So therefore it's safe to bring into your code base. The other, and this is quite useful if you have a product that is written in Rust and you want to ensure that CI will continue to build. Then a warning comes up. Someone has made a breaking change. Then what do you do? Well, you get a notification that says you're going to need to invest 1 or 2 hours to update this thing. And now you get to schedule when you spend that time. And so it's sort of moving the power to the people that are, it's moving the power to you, rather than saying that every time we update, there's a risk that we are going to incur time which we had not yet planned for. There's some other advantages on so the product initially would be a private package index. So you would subscribe to a something that's essentially a crates.io mirror downstream from crates.io, but is you apply your own policy rules. So you might wish to protect yourself against supply chain attacks. So you could say that we want to allow only dependencies that are older than 3 months. We don't want to update immediately. We want to allow the ecosystem to kind of allow things to brew and be checked before that dependency enters into our code base. And we might have other rules, for example, which licenses to apply. Do we have policies around unsafe usage and other things like this? I don't know if it's successful yet, but what I would like is to start gathering feedback. If there's anyone that thinks, okay, I think my company would pay for something like this, but I need it to look slightly differently, that's a useful conversation to have. And yeah, so that's the product in general. At least that's the concept. And but we're currently at the pilot stage of trying to find feedback to make sure that we have enough demand to justify the investment to build it properly.
No, that's very interesting. I would be very interested if I had the company because I think it's something that to some extent you can replicate by combining like 4 or 5 open source tools, but then you need to orchestrate them and put those that CI in every repo, which is expensive if you have like if you don't have a monorepo setup, for example. Plus for example, the fact that you have a policy of 3 months old crates. I don't know how would they replicate. I have similar thing. For example, for my open source project, I have Renovate that runs cargo update every week. But still, something could sneak in because let's say that I update automatically the cargo.lock every Monday. A malicious attacker could release a library immediately before Renovate runs, for example. So
yeah. So I think there are a couple of things that are more. I don't want to start scaring people. So Rust is very reliable.
no, go for it. Yeah.
And I don't want to exaggerate the risk, but I think it's important to remember that Rust is not immune from the risks that have been exposed in other languages. So we are very heavily dependent. I say the entire Rust ecosystem is very dependent on a very small number of people to maintain open source libraries diligently. If 1 or 2 people got sick in the Rust community, this would have a very dangerous impact for this would, for example, I mean, most people like would bring in the regex crate, and if they write any sort of, or would rely on the syn crate or Serde. Now, Andrew Gallant and David Tolnay, so Burnt Sushi and D. Tolnay, they're lovely, nice people. But but the Rust community is larger than, like, in some sense, the risk is very heavily concentrated. And it's very easy for, in particular, those 2 people, but there are other examples as well, for someone to make an update which either probably by accident, which essentially causes huge problems. For example, when David Tolnay decided that he didn't want to maintain like Serde YAML anymore, and just, I think, decided that it would move to archive only, or like archive the repository, for example.
Yeah.
This then created a lot of confusion, and people started to create their own YAML, like Serde implementations, and like multiple forks. And this is completely at least this is indicative of a latent risk. We are not immune to the XZ vulnerability, which was caused by a maintainer who had been maintaining or like submitting useful patches for over a year, then deciding to inject a backdoor into the compression library through admittedly a very cunning and quite a fun way. Like, I don't know if you've ever, but it doesn't really matter how that backdoor was inserted into the code base, but it got accepted. And we, as the Rust community, are somewhat naive. For example, you might say, oh, well, we just include it into the standard library. Well, the standard library, how many people do you think maintain the standard library? One of them is David Tolnay, who has now said that he's going to look over every public API. And so the concentration of risk is so huge that in saying that, I really don't want to single anyone out, but so it's more me saying that this risk exists within the Rust ecosystem, and that crates.io is very liberal with what it accepts. As soon as someone publishes a dependency, it goes live. In fact, I had I'm going on a bit of a rant here, and I apologize, but we'll at the Rust Nation UK conference this year, a lot of people cheered. In fact, I think most people cheered when this happened. The maintainer of Tokyo did a live release of a new Tokyo version on stage, which is amazingly cool.
Yes.
That all of the CI system was all kind of, and the program was in such a mature state. Sorry, the project was in such a mature state that they could just hit a button and everything would be released, and then it would be made available online. But the thing that I did was write a blog post about how scary this was. I was just terrified. If it is that easy to release a new version of Tokyo to the world without any sort of external validation, this is literally a library that sits underneath Azure, AWS, and more. There are, and if a vulnerability was injected into Tokyo, it would have such huge impact that I was just utterly terrified that this could just go in and just immediately be available. I'm sorry, I'm saying the same thing about 7 times, but the question mark for me is there are sort of 2. One, is there commercial demand? Can I convince 100 paying customers to take a bet and say, pay me, I don't know even what the kind of price would be worth, to just kind of see whether or not something like this could be worth investing in. And secondly, as a tiny company, maybe this is relating to the first, can I generate enough credibility, or can Accelerant generate enough credibility to be seen as part of the solution, or at least offer something else? Because one of the biggest concerns that I have about telling the world that you should use our index is that people don't know what Accelerant is. And so we're just another source of risk. And I have mentally fought myself by saying, no one else has yet done this. So if not us, then who? And so those have been the 2 questions. One, in principle, would you pay for protection? The same way that you would pay for other forms of defenses. You already pay for lots of other things. The secondly is like, would you pay me? Or would you pay my company? And those are two questions that I'm not sure about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like you said, you mentioned names, but like these are probably more or less the same names I had in mind. Like if you go to the top 100 crates of crates.io, a lot of them are from David Tolney, for example. Sin, Dizer, Reniao, Serde, Jason. I can go on probably. So of course there is like yeah, he is an hero. We can say that, but like of course there is a lot of risk for sure. So yeah, I think mm, it's certainly a great idea. And yeah, I invite listeners who might be interested in such a product to reach out to you on socials, LinkedIn, and so on. Yes,
Yeah, I'm very easy to find. I'm
great.
I would be very surprised if it would be difficult for people to find me.
Great. And then Paulo says, I wish more people maintained less things. Same with certain distros where a few people seem to maintain most packages. Yeah. At the same time, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so we are. So I say we. There's two dynamics at play. One is a network effect. Oh, sorry, there is a principle on sociology, which is that when people make decisions based on other people's decisions, so if there is preferences like, what are fashionable clothes, I should make my decision about what to wear based on the what people are wearing who I like. So if I make my decisions partially influenced by the people that I care about, then what happens is it's a power law or what happens is that a small number of people gain a lot of influence. Most people follow, and this is in some sense inevitable. And so it's not just that we are it's not that David Tolnay is in some sense a bad person. Even Serday, he adopted from someone else's code base and essentially took over maintainership, because that's at least my understanding of the history of the project. He's a highly competent programmer, and 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 he filled holes where there were holes. Now, is there some and like why there are very little incentives for him to essentially give up or like bring someone on to the other projects professionally? It looks very nice to say things like more than 50% of crates on crates.io take one of my crates as direct dependencies, not even transient dependencies. Like that kind of thing is a very like is something that nobody else can claim. And that means that when he speaks, other people listen. But we can create some guards. We can ensure that the systems, and that might be crates.io itself, or we can create systems that guarantee, or at least increase the resistance to mistakes and to like attacks. It's not impossible for people to lose their API keys or lose their phone, and or But at the moment, we have very few mechanisms inside the Rust community for protecting very important code bases from malicious adversaries. So Rust is now, and I think Tokyo in particular, but the Rust standard library is another area where nation states, like, it's a very attractive target.
Yeah, the Rust
Because it's
compiler
now,
itself. I mean,
or the compiler. Exactly. Very large project is everyone that is maintaining the compiler is overworked. Everyone, most of the, and but this is an area where hostile actors could essentially take over, or not take over. It would be very subtle. It would be almost impossible to detect. Over the next 10 to 15 years, that's the kind of timeline which these players would operate under, and it should be impossible to detect. But Rust is not immune, and creating some extra safeguards is useful, I think.
definitely, definitely. Okay, great. Then I wanted to ask you about the learning resources you create. So of course there is the YouTube channel where you have a lot of content there, live streams where you live code. But correct me if I'm wrong. Like the main learning resources that you created are your book, Rust in Action, and you also have a LinkedIn course. So
Yeah, okay. So the things that I do directly, for commercial users of the language, I develop bespoke training materials, and often that is so that's one option. And in fact, I have flown. You can, if you, it's like, oh, we really want Tim. Well, you can fly me around the world, and I can teach your team Rust. I can do that remotely as well. So that's one of the resources that you have available. The book. So this thing here I produced because it wanted to fit it a slightly different niche than other books. So most books on programming languages start at the top, and they work through each different part of the language. This is how the Rust book is written. And we start with the basics, and then we become more and more advanced. I wanted to create a book that teaches in a slightly different style by using examples. So we create a CPU emulator. It's like, well, we want to learn about networking or UDC. So let's create an NTP client. Let's implement a database. And they are functional examples, but they are really there for you to extend. And so that, I think, is that is an option for you. If you like books, there is a question mark, and my publisher is very, very keen on me to commit. I've been pretty busy over the last 18 months or so, last 2 years, and let's say, but I want a new edition that will focus on the 2024 edition of Rust. So a new edition of the Rust in Action book will target the 2024 edition of Rust. The drafts are starting, but I can't give an accurate timeline on when that will be publicly available. There is also, so you mentioned the LinkedIn Learning.
yeah.
So if you find me on LinkedIn, you'll see a couple of links to, actually, I think 2 courses, and there'll be another one popping up very shortly. So if your employer has a LinkedIn subscription, you can click on one of those. One of them is is a similar thing where we call it code challenges, I think, where it starts really easy, and then I think it's about 15 different code examples where I describe a problem, ask you to pause the video, and then I offer my solution. That's one of them. And I have another, which is an introduction to Rust for Java developers. And the course that will come out is actually talking about how to use Actix Web.
Nice.
So yeah, those are sort of the things in very very broad terms. You can either engage me directly, find my book, or find my resources online. In terms of the more YouTube and social media stuff as well, that's clearly an option also. But while I've been very busy, I have tried I've tried to prioritize other areas right now. So it will be complete, but I feel as though I have been letting down my YouTube audience. There is actually, sorry, I always, there's one more thing, actually. If you would like coaching, I also offer like a one-to-one option. I've got a few slots on my Patreon page. I actually have a Patreon account. And if you would like to ask, so normally people go and they click on the button, and so it's patreon.com/timclicks, and then there's like a coaching link, which I think costs about $70 US per month. And then they get the subscription reimbursed as a like teaching or learning expense by work. So that's normally how it operates, but that's available to you as well.
Okay, $70 is quite cheap. Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, I think that, well, yeah, it is, but also I have been very fortunate that I have been able to get some support for like I've been very fortunate with being able to be trusted by some larger companies, and so I try to charge big companies as much as they're willing to pay.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, so if you are private, let's say, take this opportunity. Yeah, it sounds like a great opportunity. Yes. Yeah, one last thing I want to say about Accelerant is that it is a Rust Foundation member, and as a Rust Foundation employee, I thank you because you help pay my salary. So that's great. There are great, like big companies that use Rust extensively that are not members of the Rust Foundation. So thanks a lot, even if it's a small company.
No. Look, I
For
think it's
being a
really
member.
important. No, it's not cheap actually. For me as essentially a solo and solo plus contractors, but I think it's really important to support the foundation. The foundation provides an extremely valuable service and has did not have an easy start. I think that and most people that have criticized the language have been extremely superficial, or sorry, when I say criticize the language, I mean criticize the foundation, are either outside of the Rust community or have provided a very most of the criticism is misplaced. And yeah, I'm a huge supporter of the foundation.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on this because clearly I'm biased, but yeah, like I'm seeing stuff from the inside, let's say, and I can say that everyone has good intentions and everyone is there to make the language better and to support the project. Yeah, but of course, yeah, you have to trust me on this. Yes. Another thing that I want to cover, probably the last topic, kind of, is RustForge 2025. So yeah, it's the Rust conference that you're organizing it in New Zealand in August. Tell us more about it, why you're organizing it. Yeah, go for it.
RustForge is a community conference which is for Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific, as well as hopefully provides some Rust in Asia. And that is primarily for two reasons. One, I want to be able to demonstrate to companies that are closer to me that Rust has there is interest for the language here. I also want to invite many people around the world to visit the country and use the conference as an excuse to visit. I think that you will have a lovely couple of days at the conference. It's ski season if you like skiing. You can go whale watching if you don't like. There's lots and lots of things to do in New Zealand. It's quite a nice place. And lots of people have thought about coming in the future. Well, here is a reason why you should come. It's possible as well. I'm hopeful that work will be able to either pay for the conference tickets or the flights even, and then you have scored yourself a cheap reason to come. I also have a couple of other motivations. One is I want to create an event where that feels vibrant and alive and feels as though one of the things that I want to do is make the hallway track essentially the main track of the conference. That people come, they use the talks as the excuse for getting there, and there'll be, let's say, 3 or 4 talks that they really want to see, but making sure that there are spaces for social interaction, and that might be in board games, it might be like demo or collaboration spaces. We could just have power boards and spaces for like laptops to be plugged in, and like a TV screen and a whiteboard, and teams and groups and open source maintainers can kind of collaborate and get PRs merged. It might mean as well that we have quiet spaces and like dedicated like chill out areas, so that people who are neurodiverse and who don't like lots of social interaction can get a break. So it is two things. One, it's a Rust conference, but it's also an experiment to try and find a conference that is very suited for developers and very suited for people building. And so, yeah, I'm hopeful. I haven't locked everyone in, but I'm very hopeful that I will have a number of well-known international speakers, as well as people who are just as interesting but are not as prominent, and a very rich, it should just be a fun, engaging, and really inspiring event. And I've wanted, so those are the motivations. I'm terrified that this is going to cost me a lot of money, but hopefully I can get some financial support from sponsors to be able to remove some of the risk. Yeah, that's why.
Great. Yeah. For me, like talking to other people and collaborating is the best part of a conference. So it's great that this is treated as a first-class citizen at RustForge. And yeah, for people listening, ask your employer to do like a team building event in New Zealand, and this can be a great excuse, yes, to also have a great time in New Zealand. Yes.
Yeah. Cool.
Great. So yeah, it's also it's a 4-day conference, like 2 days workshops and 2 days of talks.
Yeah. So
right?
well, at least that's the schedule we have at the moment. So the idea is that well, in fact, so I've got available 2 days for workshops. So there should be so if you are thinking about providing a workshop, we can provide you with space. I also want to do a few extra things like city tours, and there are some other things that are nearby. So if you like Lord of the Rings, you can go to, I'm going to try to arrange a tour to the weavers that created the cloaks that the hobbits wore, and Gandalf as well. You can. There are also some sightseeing places. There's an e-bike company. We're right on the waterfront, so it's a harbor location. It used to be an industrial area, and so next to the venue is a company that runs that hires e-bikes, and they also offer tours. And so there'll be an opportunity for going for a tour, and then we can come back to the main venue for lunch. And so those first 2 days are opportunities for you to meet other people that are visiting the city, for who like Rust, in different ways. And so I also think that one of the other things we'll do is visit a wildlife sanctuary, or at least provide an option for people that want to come. There's actually a helicopter company on the wharf, and I'm wondering if anyone wants to go for a helicopter ride. The other thing that we will have available will be collaboration spaces. So if you want to, I think other conferences, the Rust Fest conferences call this Impl Days. So if you just want to do some coding with other people, then that will be available too. And I wanted to do them at the start, so that by the time that you reach the conference, you are
You know
you
some
know
people
everybody
already. Yeah.
Because it's very awkward at a conference, because you don't you it's actually very difficult to find new people. I noticed this myself, that I often talk to people that I already know, that I might already know online, and what I want to do is create spontaneous uh, opportunities for people to interact with each other that doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel awkward. It feels a little bit awkward right at the start, but then hopefully over the week we can establish relationships that will last 5-10 years online.
Yeah.
I think that is my real hope for the conference, is that it creates a real sense of community, because that doesn't exist where I am, and at least it doesn't exist as a conference event yet. I would like it to grow into an event for Australia and New Zealand, but I need to grow a team as well as an event. So at the moment it's the Tim show. So part of my job will actually to make it not be the Tim show, essentially. And I also think there'll be lots of space for international guests as well. So if you are considering coming to New Zealand, you are very, very welcome to.
Great. Yeah, as a tip for listeners, try to meet new people at the conferences is the best part. Yes, absolutely. So if you agree, I'll ask you one question from the chat, the one about job market, and then one closing question.
Okay.
So yeah, Matteo before asked, with the landscape of more popular languages dominating the job market, would you recommend learning Rust to a less experienced dev trying to get into the job market? If so, why?
If you are learning a language just to get a job, go for Java or C# or Python, or in fact, maybe TypeScript or something.
Yeah.
Where I am from in New Zealand, 70-80% of code is written in either C# or Java. And so there are fewer jobs in Rust. But my expectation is that the jobs that are in Rust are like better or kind of more interesting. So
No, it's true. It's true.
for example, just a shout out to one of the people, the other Rust users here. We have a company making a fusion reactor. It's about 15 kilometers from where I currently am sitting, and they use Rust, not in everywhere, but in parts. And I don't know if you will be able to write code that that drives superconducting magnets everywhere in the world. But if but I think that Rust, I think that companies that use Rust are typically companies that have smart, engaged teams and management that understand where that understand that using something different than the rest of the industry as an acceptable trade-off. So most businesses will use tools that most other businesses use because it's boring and easy.
Easy to hire, yes.
But some companies will accept a degree of risk, and Rust is one of the options. Rust will be, but the question is, like, today, if you were to start and you wanted it, if you really needed a job this year, then it would probably be something else, or at least, you know, the safer option is another language. It doesn't mean that you are committed to that other field. It just means that the job market today is not mature enough for everyone everyone who wants to write Rust to use Rust. But it will grow. It will grow.
Yeah, I was talking about this with a friend of mine, and you said to me this, like, probably the average Rust job is way more interesting than the average Java, Python, JavaScript, TypeScript job, simply because of the companies that are using Rust. They are using it for a specific need. So maybe they are writing performance software, or maybe they are writing something that is critical and they don't want their software to fail. And they're not just a company that says, okay, what's the easiest way? What's the easiest way we can find new developers? Okay, I don't know, TypeScript on the front end and the back end. I don't know. Yeah, probably, like, I'm not saying that every Rust project is more interesting than other languages. Of course, there are companies that are using Rust that are bad companies for sure. But I would bet that the average Rust job is more interesting than the average, more more common languages. Yes.
Yeah, if there is a risk that you become a Java developer, for example, and then you are sort of a programming technician, where your job becomes wiring different parts of other libraries together, and there's actually very little programming. It's very boring, and it's quite tedious, actually. So but people have to eat. And so if there's a job available, like if the job market looks, so if the job market looks easier in different areas, then you should be pragmatic. I started a company because there were no jobs here. Like, it was essentially out of fear that I needed my savings to survive until the job market recovered. So New Zealand is not a company. Sorry, it's not a country where anyone monitors, really. But in real terms, we have been in a recession for the last, I think, about a year. And so the job market itself is quite weak. And there was no way after working at Amazon that I would be able to find a similar position. And so I created one myself. And I'm lucky enough, I feel very privileged to have the like international recognition to be able to start something uh, as start something and for it to also be successful. I think that that has been like I feel like I can't describe how uh, how lucky I am from that point of view. It's just been the most bizarre time. I just and yeah, just so. But most people, yeah, most people take uh, need to be safe. And if you are not able to tolerate the risk because of your personal situation, you might have family responsibilities, then then it's okay to take the safe option. It's
Yeah.
also okay if you're a bit younger, or you might have, I don't know, you might be in a relationship where your significant other says, well, you could risk it for 9 months. We could probably survive on one income. Or you know, if you're younger, you could maybe live at your parents' house or something. Maybe you could risk learning Rust and then, or starting something yourself. You know, you have the most important thing is to make the decision intentionally, to be active and mindful when you make the decision. Don't allow the world to dictate how you behave. You are allowed to assess your circumstances and decide, I'm going to learn Rust. Or or you can also say, I'm going to assess the situation and say, I like Rust, but I'm going to learn Rust in 3 years because for the next 3 years, I need to feed my family.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Those are good advices. Yeah, like that. Sometimes junior developers say, "So, should I seek for a Rust job?" Yeah, the thing that I say is seek for a job, look for a job, but then don't. If you're passionate about Rust, continue learning Rust on the side. The ideal thing is doing open source, and then in a few years, I'm sure you will learn. You will find a Rust job. Yeah, if you're passionate about it. And yeah, you said that you're lucky, but from the outside, I would say that you built your luck over the years. You've been very active.
Yeah,
So
I should say it has been a deliberate process over 15 years of my career to create the profile that I have now.
exactly.
So, um, uh, and I started, yeah, it has been even writing Rust in Action, for example. I wrote that book very slowly, and that's because I wrote all of the example code, which I then wrote. And, but it was 8 until 11 p.m., 3 nights a week, plus 4 hours on the weekend. And that was the schedule that I held for about 4 years.
Wow.
And I did that not for financial gain, but because I wanted to contribute to Rust and because I wanted to be able to create something that would give me immediate credibility later on by paying for it early. And so there are other opportunities that you have, but the strategy that I took was very expensive from a personal point of view. I like I used to run marathons, and like I was very serious into fitness. I could lift 200 kilograms. I but my fitness completely got destroyed when I became a dad, and when I but ran the, and so my own sort of personal, and there were lots of things, but um it I very close. I'm astonished that my relationship has survived. It shouldn't have. Like I have been very selfish in many ways. Um, I know that I tell myself that I am focused on my family indirectly by becoming well known and becoming influential in the Rust community. And it's very important that I continue to develop that. But it has its own cost. And so developing a new skill and becoming and developing your own career is never an easy decision. And anyone listening to this is allowed to make their own decision. They're allowed to choose their own path. But my recommendation is to choose a path rather than discover in 10 years that you have been following a path that was set for you and you are unhappy. Like, I'd rather be unhappy because I chose something and it failed rather than because I get to my, you might hit your 50s or something and then realize that you feel like you've wasted your life. It's not a feeling that I want to do. I never wanted to go to work, come home, watch television for a couple of hours, go to sleep, go to work, spend a couple of hours in front of the TV, and then go to sleep, and then pay off the home loan. Like, I wanted more to my life, and so that's one of the reasons why I decided to invest the way that I have.
Thank you. Thank you for being so transparent, and yeah, it was very inspirational. I invite people, since the end of the year is approaching, I think using those holidays to reflect more on like this year, next year is a good opportunity. Yeah. Closing question, very easy one, just to close. So no, I'm joking. I think it's a difficult question, but I will ask anyway. So credits.io downloads grow exponentially year by year, and there are more and more people every year that are starting learning Rust. In your opinion, how can the Rust project and the Rust community make the Rust language more approachable and accessible for newcomers?
The Rust project, I wonder if, and I think about this, the Rust project has tried this. I think the foundation tried this as well, but here's a suggestion just off the top of my head. Have someone who is available for people that want to contribute to the project. So by the project, I mean the compiler, the standard library, people that go into Zulip, the official Zulip channel, and get lost.
Yes.
and have like so the problem that the project has is for a newcomer that there are 300 different channels, and each channel has 10,000 threads that have 10,000 messages.
Yes.
I mean, very large exaggeration, but
it's
very intimidating. And then there's all the RFCs, and then there's all the GitHub issues, and then the GitHub threads. So I think that what would be useful is having a space for people that are learning or thinking that they want to contribute, like having an advisor or some sort of mentor. There were bits, and I think that there were a couple of things that the foundation did. I think that they had a community relations person a couple of years ago, and there was also I think they called it the Rust C dev guide. There was like the Rust compiler. I think I don't remember which team hosted on virtual sessions where people could drop in and ask questions about the compiler. But I wonder if that would be a way to make the contributing to the project more accessible. I personally hate Zulip. I find it extremely confusing, and so I have tried to contribute to the standard library a few times and other teams, and always get lost. It's mostly a time zone thing as well. It's currently very difficult for people outside of North America and Europe to meaningfully contribute because a lot of the discussion happens in real time. And more broadly, I think so I think that might be one thing. In terms of the language, I think that the language is actually getting easier to learn. Lots of the release 1.79 relaxed some of the borrow checking rules, and now some of the examples that I used to show about how the borrow checker works, or at least how borrowing works, don't need any special treatment, because the compiler is now smart enough to infer the lifetime rules as well. So I think that the language will soften over time. The only thing would be to the only thing I would say is that every new feature has a cost.
Yeah.
It might, and so there's almost two teams in the Rust world about whether or not Rust is finished. Like, essentially the language is done, and now all we're doing is making it we're just making very subtle changes in bits and pieces, or people that want radical changes. I personally think that experimentation and very new things, such as, and if I don't mean to start a whole new topic, I already want to close, but if we want a new language, an effect system, very advanced type system features, high kinded types, these sorts of things, then create a new language. Don't do it in Rust. One of the easiest ways to make Rust easy to learn is by keeping it still, because then the learning resources have time to mature. If you keep changing Rust, then the learning resources need to be updated every time. And so, yeah, I personally think that experimentation should happen in a new language, but I probably will see many pitchforks and flames coming towards my house because of that.
Hopefully not. I'm happy that the language is becoming easier and easier. I also see it. Regarding new features, or not, I don't have particular opinions. I would like to speak of what you said about like joining the Rust project. I think Zulip is intimidating at the beginning. Like, I was lost also when I joined the infra team this summer. But like, after a while, I see that it has some benefits over like Slack or Discord, because it's easier to not miss conversations, because like in Discord,
because it's every single discussion. I like it too, because discussions are very structured. It's like, this is the theme for this, and I do appreciate it, and maybe it's similar to Rust. If you took the time to learn it, then you would like it.
I like it, I would say, yes. And you can say, for example, this conversation, just mute it, I'm not interested, stuff like that. So to newcomers, to people that want to contribute to the Rust project, I would say take some time to learn. Zulip is not like, you will get it, you're software engineers. And also, you don't need to contribute to the standard library or Rust project or the Rust compiler. There are a lot of teams that do a lot of stuff, even front end for the DocsRS, for example, like, let's say, like, there are many teams that you can contribute to. And I will say, I will speak for my team. There is the infra team. Yes, I think the easiest way to say that, like, to find, yeah, to say that you're interested in joining a team is probably um, having a look at what the team is doing, and then writing in Zulip a new message saying, I saw you're working on this stuff. I'm interested in this. I would like to help. How can I start? I think that's the best way to start, for sure in my team, but maybe you can try this approach in other teams as well. Yes, and yeah, for people who are willing to start contributing to open source, maybe they sometimes they say they think that, like, they see the Rust project as unreachable, but I would say it's an option. Yes, we don't buy it. Yes. um,
Yeah, I think that the other thing to mention about this is that the Rust community is filled with very good people everywhere, and it's extremely difficult to find people that are uh, not willing to help. That actually has its own risks because lots of the load gets uh, uh, the burden on helping kind of gets pushed to just a few people. But I think that it is actually a lot easier than it looks. It just looks like a lot because people care.
yes, yes. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Despite what I said, like how to better onboard people, how to better present the work we do, and attract new contributors is something that we discuss, I would say, weekly with my team. So we completely acknowledge that it's intimidating. Absolutely, yeah, and yeah. Uh, Unfortunately, that's the way it is, and we accept suggestions. Yes, I would say. Tim, thanks a lot. It's been more than 2 hours, so thank you for dedicating so much time to me. I hope you had a great time. And yeah, if you have any topics that we didn't cover or something that you wanted to mention that we didn't, feel free. And also, how can people follow you on social media? And yeah, feel free to say whatever you like.
no, I think this has been a lovely discussion. It's been thank you very much for allowing me to talk about learning Rust, teaching Rust, and Rust itself. Actually, it's and through and also how people develop their own careers, and that it's been a pleasure. I think if people are interested in connecting with me, do search for Tim Clicks, and I think I'm available on every platform.
Great.
So pick whichever you prefer, and no, and nothing further to add except for thank you.
Great. Um, yeah, Tim says thanks, Marco. Thanks, Tim, and thanks to all the commenters. Yes, thanks a lot for the people who stayed us live and asked questions. And yeah, and thank you, Tim, as well. Regarding to this team, if you want to pick someone who yeah, asked the best questions or you had the best interactions to yeah, gift the book, what who would you pick?
Well, I didn't want to have to choose. So I think that one of the things that I'm not sure if Paolo would be interested in a book, but because he started the conversation, I think that would be a good place to start.
Great, great.
Uh, and yeah. So if you would like to talk to him, otherwise I'm more than happy to. If he already has a book or doesn't want one, then we can go through the list. But yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, Paolo is still with us. Yeah, thanks everyone. Okay, then Paolo, yeah, you're a lucky winner of a signed physical copy of Rust in Action. Um, I I agree that Paolo is a good choice. He's a very active member of the Rust community. Also, of the Italian Rust community, we have a Telegram group where we talk in Italian, and Paolo helps a lot of newcomers. So That's great. Yes. Yeah, Matteo is saying 2 hours passed by. Yeah, I'm amazed too. Yes, it was a great conversation. Yes. So thanks also Matteo for tuning in. Again, thank you, Tim. I let you free now. I hope you'll have a good day and good week ahead. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, grazie. Bye bye.
Bye.